Hey everyone, so in this video I'm going to talk about the study of strategy in piano practice, some of my philosophy and thoughts around that, and also the layering of strategy in piano practice. So I likely will end up talking about how tips and tricks aren't enough. I mean, definitely I will mention some tips, tricks, hacks, and so on, some of which are actually truly useful, but they're just not strong enough used in isolation or used randomly or not used in conjunction with each other or with tried and true strategic principles or mindsets. So I'm definitely not the only one that utilizes practice tricks and thoughts and methods, and many people have done research or read research. Some have even developed their own methods. But there's kind of like a lot of different camps. Like the true traditionalist, let's do things exactly the same way that they've been done since the piano was created. I think maybe some of these people really are completely unaware of spaced repetition and how the brain works, and some of the other strategies that I've mentioned even in the first video. So, but then others, they actually have taken the time to read some of the work that's out there, to try experiments in their own practice and so on. And they may not be as extreme as all that. But I think the problem is that even once people encounter some of these concepts, they are using them as a sort of like, oh, if this is difficult, let's utilize this idea here. Or this part is technically tricky, therefore probably we should use this concept here. They're not really taking a bird's eye view and seeing, what is going to apply globally to this whole piece, what's going to apply maybe throughout all of my practice. Sometimes it may be that a person's specific personality type even might make certain applications of strategies more useful. So I started noticing some of these patterns such that maybe across all students' practice, across the board, everybody's improving as a result of application of one concept or another. And then within that, maybe there are certain situations where if you applied this concept in all of these particular situations, then everybody would be improving across the board. So it's kind of like we're starting to extract these foundational or fundamental principles. And once you've established these, of course, as in just about anything, there may be some kind of, random lone exception here or there. But once you've found that something always works, either across everything or across, or it has a very wide reach, or it almost always works, it makes much more sense to be applying this consistently and in combination with other things that always work or that almost always work. So I think it's because of me doing this type of thinking, doing tons of experimentation on myself and my students, research across many years, that essentially I've become a specialist in strategy. It doesn't mean that other people don't use strategy. In fact, like even just this week scrolling through Facebook, I can see that sometimes there are articles or maybe seminars or master classes given by wonderful pianists, and they are talking about the art of practice or the practice of practice, or they have some other take on that. So, and I could be wrong, but for me, I think that I'm one of the few that focuses on strategy as sort of the core that holds everything else together. As in, I'm not the sort of teacher that has everybody progress through like these specific pieces or this specific sequence of things, as it is in many schools. Like maybe these scales, these pieces, level 1, level 2, or I teach these foundational technical principles so that everybody moves in this particular way. And there's nothing wrong with any of these things. It's just that my core is strategy, like how to think, how to solve problems. We apply those sorts of skills to everything else, how to derive technique, how to create extremely detailed musicality, how to plan extremely detailed musicality, right? How to acquire speed, how to acquire independent thought, ability to visualize, and so on. So I guess that's really a big part of my educational philosophy, that strategy and mindset are at the center, and everything else derives from that, because I think ultimately everything is deriving from the way that we're thinking and feeling. And if we're problem solving and able to take care of everything that can be solved logically, then the mysterious, the beyond of music becomes much more easy to access, at least in my view. So in terms of like the tips and tricks, and I don't really mean that in such like a condescending way, but I mean, like, for instance, spaced repetition, moving on from something, coming back, relearning it, moving on, coming back, relearning it, like I've talked about in the first video. You could easily say, like, oh, this part, this student's having trouble, so let's just have them try spaced repetition there. Or let's have the student try separate hands in this area. Let's have them try go back and forth between different sections, because this part looks like it's going to be maybe more difficult for them to remember. And there's other concepts too that I'm sure I'll talk about in future videos, like this idea of overlapping notes, for instance. Like, it's much better to practice from first beat of measure 1 to first beat of measure 2, and then first beat of measure 2 to first beat of measure 3, as opposed to just measure 1 in isolation, measure 2 in isolation, because this way at least there's a point of overlap on that first beat of measure 2. So, way better to do one line and then the first beat of the next line, or one page and then the first beat of the next page, so that people are less prone to stopping at the ends of things. So, you could also say, like, hey, you could use that overlapping notes idea here, because you tend to be stopping in different places. Or like the adding in reverse idea. And this one, let me see if I can find like a quick example of something to do here. Let's see. So honestly, I haven't even planned like which piece it is I'm going to pull up here. So let's say that we have, Fur-Elise here. And I mean, the whole adding in reverse idea would be like, if you wanted to play perfectly from like there to there, for instance, instead of just trying from the beginning and then probably like messing up over here, and then, trying from the beginning again, and then messing up over here again, and this just kind of repeating over and over. Instead, you would try to play this part correctly, and then that'll make it much more likely that this will then be played correctly. And then you go back over here, gradually making way back to the beginning, so that this is the strongest part. This is something I'm sure I can kind of elaborate on in future videos as well. But so like that seems like and also if you end up messing up, instead of then going from the beginning over and over, after you've made your way back to the beginning, then it's right back to the end again. Practice that part alone again, and then this part again. So it's this constructing or adding from the end that's going to be the default strategy. So for instance, that's a very useful tip right there. And I could congratulate myself and think like, well, that was now that person's taken something away with them in the lesson. So that's good for now. But again, I don't actually want it to only be for this piece and this situation. Try this adding in reverse strategy. It'll probably help. That's enough for now. But then we're going to want to combine that with other techniques as well. So that's kind of what I mean by not just using things in isolation, and what I mean by the necessity of layering strategy. So I discovered over the years that, for instance, this like adding in reverse principle, it really it holds true way more often than you would think. Like even when I'm like, oh, this is holding true like most of the time. So maybe I'll have students like start from the beginning, try a few times, and then if it doesn't work, then they can add in reverse. It works so well that often trying from the beginning truly seems completely unnecessary. So again, I'm sure I'll talk about this more at some future point. But so this has become a foundational principle in my logical methodology. It's something that holds true in its usefulness almost all of the time. Therefore, we should use it as one of the core considerations of practice. Like, we should assume that it should be done each time, rather than a situational thing where once the student encounters trouble, then they use it. Or once we assess that the student needs it, then we use it. We just assume that they're going to use it and it's going to be useful unless proven otherwise, because of how strong this concept has been proven. So in terms of like layering here, let me see. I like how new everything is for me. I mean, it's still weird for me to just actually talk in these videos, even though I talk a whole lot in the lessons. And it's also new for me to use this iPad to just like write things, at least in the context of this video. So for instance, we have this like adding and reverse, right? So this would be like this first big concept here. And then, I mean, we talked about like spaced repetition. So that means moving on from something, coming back, learning it again, moving on from something, coming back, learning it again, and so on. And then maybe let's say that like overlapping notes principle that I mentioned earlier. So you can see that this is not very neat. That's okay. And what else? I mean, I'm a huge fan of using the metronome. I know this is controversial. Probably I'll say this and then immediately I'll have like other teachers beating down my door saying how the metronome robs everybody of rhythm. But it's really not true. The method really is only as good as its user. Like, you can use like a hammer or like a screwdriver or whatever, well in the appropriate situations in a very useful way, or you can use it and it's not even the right tool for the right time. But as long as it's used responsibly, metronome, any other tool is, it's neutral. It just depends on whoever's utilizing it. Altered rhythms. Now this would be like, for the sake of making a given fast passage smoother, for instance, you are changing the rhythms in some way, and definitely sure I'll elaborate on that at some point in the future as well, right? So like these are, I might as well just think of another one just for the heck of it. Let's see, what else would we do here? I'd say interleaving. This is like going back and forth between different types of processes and alternating between them. And let's say, just as like a general concept, desirable difficulty, like purposely making things difficult. So, okay, to be honest, like this is not pre-planned. I didn't like write out a list. Like I'm literally just whatever's popping into my head in the moment. So like here's like a whole bunch of things here. And if I have a given piece, I'm not going to take this concept and be like, let me use that in this situation here. And then take this spaced repetition concept and use it in like measures 5 to 6 over here, or use the metronome just for this particular area there. There may be times when I utilize them in isolation, but for the most part, too bad this didn't turn into a pretty circle. But for the most part, let's see if I can. I mean, this entire stack here is going to apply in full to everything. I mean, that's what I mean about stacking strategy. And, I'll play devil's advocate for myself. Like, isn't that just like a huge waste of time to do all of those things through everything? Is it really necessary? Like, is it actually going to help? And, it helped me to accomplish all those projects. Like, it helped me to memorize 150 pieces and upload them to YouTube in 2017. It helped me to memorize the complete Chopin etudes. in latter half of, I think it was like 2020 or something like that. It's helped all of my students all these years. So yeah, that's kind of like the big overarching thought. I'm glad that the diagram turned out to be rather pretty here. So this is what I literally use during the lessons as well too. Like I have my iPad Pro with the Apple Pencil and the Magic Keyboard here and my phone, and I do this really like low tech screen sharing. I honestly don't do regular screen sharing this so often. I just find it nice to be able to just flip the camera and just write stuff directly. And I found this nice app that can let me just like flip this camera around, which I thought was nice. So yeah, hope some of that is useful. Definitely looking forward to elaborating on some of these ideas, and let me know in the comments if there's anything else you want me to talk about. And like and subscribe if this is useful to you, if you want to see more content like this. And looking forward to next week.